one of the things that you did that I loved, and I regret that my dad had passed away when I was 11. So I never got to
So
have,
sorry.
yeah, I mean, it was a really huge loss in my life for, he didn't walk me down the aisle. He wasn't around for me to get to know him as an adult and have any adult conversations with him, really. And I loved that you, in this book, sat across from your grandparents and had these adult conversations with them. What was that like?
Oh, it was, one part magical to imagine that I could have that conversation, that I could be in a physical realm as an adult person. And it's one of the most emotional parts of the book. And I think for a
Mm.
lot of readers, it was one of the most emotional, relatable parts of the book because you don't know I mean, we all say this, it's such a relatable part of life, but they're going to be with us only a short time, the grandparents, and then they're going to be gone, and we regret all the questions we never asked them for the rest of our lives. It's such a part of the human experience, that generation one up from ours. It is such a part of all of our human experience, but to get that opportunity, even just to have the opportunity to write it, was so emotionally satisfying because
Yeah.
there's a part of this book that I feel like was real. It was real because I wrote it and the emotional experience I had. And I had no idea that I would have that kind of satisfying. And the dog for me was so emotionally satisfying because,
Cecil?
yeah, oh, thank you for remembering his name. But and then for me, when I had the conversation with myself, my younger self in the bedroom, those are probably the three points in the book that are so emotionally satisfying, even though they didn't actually really happen. They changed me.
Yeah. There were times that I had to remind myself that this wasn't real. This was
Wow.
like a fiction that you went back in time because it felt so real. I wanted to ask you about your siblings too, because I mean, there were a lot of dynamics that were going on with you as kids and as adults. So, did you understand your siblings a little bit better after writing this book?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I understood the most, well, first of all, I got this rare opportunity when I wrote them as children, I remembered them from the pictures and from what I remembered of what we did. But seeing their adult selves in their imagined child selves was really, again, satisfying and wonderful. But also I just gained this appreciation that we'd done this ride together, as different as we are, and we've come fractured just like brothers and sisters do all over. We seem to come apart and get together because we are so completely different, but that
Mm.
just an appreciation that I've got to do the ride with these two people. And you know what, and then the appreciation for how they approached the book project as the greatest thing, and they were just so
Yeah.
proud and happy and wanted to
Okay.
talk about it. And I think, you know, those dynamics, like even with my mother, that was hugely, I forgot how supported and loved and celebrated I was,
See. Yeah.
and what a gift that was. And we're still different, but the book has become a family book. And
Okay.
we're proud of it. Now that's the kids, we all have kids, and my sister doesn't have kids, but my brother and I do. As they've gotten old enough, each of them has read it. My son, he's a freshman at LSU, he just read it. He just listened to it on his way home from school for the first time. You know,
Okay.
so yeah,
That's so cool. I believe that you are right in the book when you say that three people can be raised in the same household and come out with completely different memories. And we all have different experiences with the same parents and talk about three different people raised together in the same home, you three. And one of my favorite parts of the book that you kind of touched on earlier when you went to the mall and you took each of you shopping, including yourself, shopping, you took each of you to be able to go to the store they wanted to get the things that they wanted to have the experience that they wanted to. Why did you choose what you chose for each of them? And I'm really curious why you chose what you did for yourself.
right. Well, I really tried to be true to what I thought each person would want based on what I remember they wanted, and then of course based on what I know they want now. But that whole scene was written because, and I hate to give her credit, my sister, Kim, who doesn't have any children, she, every time one of our kids has a birthday, she takes them to the store they want to go to and she buys them what they want. So that was totally tip of the hat to my sister. That's what
Okay.
she does. And so that was the inspiration for that. And then plus it got me in the mall longer and I liked the whole mall scene. I loved the nostalgia and the differences and that, the mall in the 70s was about the greatest thing that
Oh,
could ever happen to you.
yeah.
And so I wanted to write that. But the things that, Kim selected the K stick pen because hers was going to be all about fashion. And in going through the Sears catalogs, I had forgotten about the stick pens. And I knew she would want whatever it was the thing. And that was the thing in 1978.
Okay.
And Rick loved Star Wars, and actually
Mm-hmm.
in a Houston newspaper, that was an actual ad. Meet Chewbacca at the Greens Point JCPenney or
Oh,
whatever it
how
was.
fun.
So I wrote that in based on fact. That was part of my research. And then so we did that. And then mine those things are true about me. And unfortunately, I like processed meat logs and fake cheese. And
Hickory Farms.
I always wanted to go to Hickory Farms. And that's a lot of people's favorite scene. I always wanted to go to Hickory Farms as a kid and I never went. And then I love football. I ended up writing about football and I didn't see that at the time. And I would have completely been up in the helmets and the bumper pool tables. And
I love
so
it.
I wrote that whole thing true. All those things that we selected were true to who we are as kids. And I actually got Kim and Rick for Christmas after the book came out. I got them the items they got at the
Oh,
mall and my brother got me a big meat log, so the yardo beef. So there you go.
oh my gosh, that is so fun. I love that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Pro Football Hall of Fame in your book. I
Hmm.
go past it all the time. I see it every week.
I've been twice, and we got to go to the induction 3 years ago for our. That's where we went for our 30th anniversary. Everybody else went to
Okay.
Hawaii, and we went to Canton. Loved
Yeah.
every minute of it.
Well, we go to the parade every single year
Okay.
and yeah, and we go to a lot of the happenings.
It's a
So,
beautiful facility now. It's grown too, I know, where there's a whole lot more. They're building more where it's going to be like a
oh my gosh, yes,
entertainment destination as
yep.
opposed to just the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it is huge. It's fun. Also, I wanted to touch on this memory. And well, I wanted to know if it was a memory or if it was something that you needed to write. And that was about the Bonanza scene. And when you were there with your dad, because every other scene in the book, this was so different to me. Your dad seemed happy, more joy, like he wanted to go out to eat. He wanted to be a part with the family. Uh, and I didn't catch that in any other part of the book. So I was just wondering if that was an experience that you had or if it was one that you needed.
Boy, that's a great question. No one has ever said to me, your father was, I'm really going to have to think about this, that I portrayed him different in that scene. I'm going to write that down. No one's ever, so thank you for that. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's not from a memory because that's how dad acted because it was such a big deal when we went out to dinner that he would have
Okay.
made such a big deal out of it. And he liked to do the whole thankful thing. So maybe I let him
Okay.
run that scene. He was living when I wrote the scene though, but
Okay.
maybe it was something I needed to do. And I don't know if it was subconsciously that I wanted to celebrate him in that scene because the whole focus had been on mom throughout the book. And then
Yeah.
I wanted to show that in dad. That is such a great question, Anne. And I don't know that I have a definitive answer. I have to think about it.
That was
Um,
the one where your dad stood out the most to me in the book.
right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. But he liked to do the whole around the table thing, and my mother hated it. And I wrote that into the siege, like, Dick, I'm fine, like shut it down. But and I think that had dinner table vibes, which I did a little bit of how, because we all sat like a lot of people did in the 70s. We sat down every night, and everyone sat down in their
Yeah.
place, and it was kind of somewhere between like very warm and friendly, and like this is a total like anything could happen. Like this is the most dysfunctional thing anybody's ever been to. And also, yay, this is wonderful. But I think that maybe that was me showing how he acted at the dinner table because we only had, I think, breakfast at the actual table in the book. And that was dinner dad too. And so
Mm.
maybe that's what I was maybe that's one of the things I was highlighting. So I made that scene bigger because that's how he would have acted at a table with all of us sitting around it.
Well, it was a good scene.
Thank you.
And it also made me realize how expensive things are today versus $14 for a meal.
Right. And all those prices were I mean that's all researched, but that's, so all
Sure.
that was completely, it's like the scene, the go meet Darth Vader scene in the mall in Houston. That was a lot of it's based on facts, and then a
Sure,
lot of
I knew
memories.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could feel that. You with your memories, talking about memories, you bring up a really good point when you talk about staying in the bad memories versus good memories. And where do you find yourself most of the time?
I think this book has helped me stay in the better memories, and it's another gift. And I just never would have expected when I sat down to write my funny little book that it would have this kind of emotional ramifications on me, much less someone who read it, which would have been totally out of my mind. But I think because of
Hmm.
going through this process, I think it has shifted my perception where I try to stay in the good memories more, and I also try to look at memories as malleable. And I rely on my memory still because I have a great memory. I have a better memory than my brother and sister, and they would admit that. But that doesn't mean the way it all went down is completely 100% factual. And I think there's a lot of hope in that. And
Mm.
I think there's a lot of almost emotional freedom in that. Like I don't have to be anchored to that anymore all the time. Like it happened, but that doesn't have to be the anchor for the rest of my life.
Well, you do bring up the point in the book that, those tough things that happen to us, that when does it get to the point where we talk and talk about things and then we realize that it did happen, but the realization that talking about it makes it worse after a while. So, and we're all different in how we deal with our trauma and how we talk about it. But I do know that we can reach a point where it is not healthy to
Right.
revisit and revisit, and it's healthy to pick up and move on and figure out a new way to move. Did this book help you do that? It seems like it did.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what you said is so important. That threshold is different for each human being. Each of us have a different threshold for, when we're ready to say, okay, that happened, that was bad, but I'm going to move forward now. And I don't think it's even done in a definitive way or, an absolute way. I think it's just done emotionally. And then we're just ready to go to the next thing. I love the line in the book, and this just made me think of it. It's like the baggage carousel at the
Yeah,
airport. You
that's it.
take the bags on and off, and take them off again, and put them on, and at some point, it just goes around, around, around again until you walk away from it.
Yeah, I had that visual in my head when I was explaining that to you because that's what it feels after a while. It's just it is time to kind of pick up and get those luggage off the carousel and then go off and move on. And we need to do that at times. We have to. And I felt that with your book. It felt so healing to me in such a creative way. And it wasn't like the normal, boring way of revisiting your
Right.
life.
Wow, that's very humbling. I will say that as I've reread the book, I think this is very common for anyone who's written a book or written anything. You are being creative about anything. You look back at certain parts, you're like, I can't believe I said that. But I think the thing I'm the proudest of is how the book goes, it'll get kind of deep, and then there'll be some humorous zap right behind it. I like that. And I think that's what life is like though. You know,
Hmm.
we we live through things that are real and hard, and then someone makes us laugh. And there's such value in that. And we forget that, we can be that to each other. And that's so important.
Yeah.
Levity is so important. And
Hmm.
because it keeps things in perspective, and that's who we can be to each other as adults who have experienced, this incredible, messy, screwed up, beautiful life.
I want to ask you about your mom. Did she have a hard time reading herself in the book?
I cannot imagine. Mom and I have discussed it, but we haven't had like a in-depth, like we touch on it, and I know that because the epilogue is true. I did go and talk to mom. I did go and have that conversation with her, and we did not agree on everything. We both cried, which we neither of us cried ever, and we walked away at least living in the land of honesty. And my mom has chosen, at least in her conversations with me, to focus on the parts of the book that she felt seen, and valued, and she's focused on those things. And maybe with her friends she said, oh my God, I can't believe she said all that. But I think I what my perception of what she's done with it is, she's done what dad said in the text. We don't talk about those things, and she's good with that, and she's fine with not discussing those things, at least with me. And I know she hasn't discussed them with my brother and sister, but she has told me stuff like, I liked when you said dad's a great guy, but he's he the right guy for me. When's
Mm,
mom's ladies' night out? She liked it when I said, um, she's living this beautiful life, but is this the life she wanted? She liked when I said mom wanted to be a writer, but she didn't have the opportunities that I did. Because I think mom saw herself seen as a woman and as this, amazing individual who was captive to her time period, which was absolutely the truth. And I think she liked having her mother being seen as this negative force, you know, in this backhanded kind of way in her life. And I think she's chosen, at least with me, to focus on those things. Um, and then she also, I mean, this is personal, but she has apologized to me several times since the book came
oh,
out, and not in a
oh,
specific way, but she said stuff like, I know I did stuff I shouldn't have done. I know I did things. And I'm like, Mom, we're good, And so she has, so I guess that's her reaction to what the book brought out and what it didn't say, because that's all in there under the surface.
I mean, that's actually beautiful. And what about your siblings? Have you been able to revisit with them and say, why did we act like nothing was happening in the house? I mean, it wasn't extreme, but
No,
whatever it was at the time, why was it just ignored and moved on?
right. And I think the fact that it wasn't extreme makes it even more, not dangerous, but like nefarious, like it's because it's not big, nobody's going to deal with it, and so it just seems like everything's perfect and it's fine.
Right.
But they were, I think they were both, well, especially my sister, my brother and I have discussed it less. He's discussed it in the context of one of his children's relationship with his wife, but my sister was surprised that she knew some of the negative components of my relationship with my mother, but she was surprised at the breadth of it because I actually shared with her, more details, and she was absolutely just dumbfounded and upset, very highly upset about
Mm,
it. And
mm,
because her reality was different than mine, I didn't go into
mm.
her room and talk to her about it,
Yeah.
and it didn't happen in front of other people. And so I think she was shocked and very, as my big sister, I mean, as jealous as I was of her, she had my back,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay. Okay. Well, every family has secrets, and you're right. And it doesn't have to be a huge life-altering situation in order for it to affect who we are as individuals for the rest of our lives.
Right,
It is those underlying hidden secrets, those things that are not said, those dynamics within the family that shape us, that are not healthy, that no one mentions. And these are the stories that are not normally written about. And I'm so glad that you did that because is that is that why you added that twist to the time travel too? Because I have to say, I think that everyone should read this book because these stories, they're not the ones that are often told. And it is that kind that hits people where they live, more people where they live. So many people don't have those extremes. And I think that time travel twist actually kind of made it more fun in a way where we were invited into uh, most people's lives, most people's, not the extremes.
right. I think that's a great observation. And for me, the time travel was what I wanted to do. So, and it ended up being, like you said, this great, connector, a device to, rather than just remembering it, to relive it, and then that's so relatable. The whole thing is so
Yeah,
relatable. And
it
whenever I
is.
talk to somebody about it, even when someone hasn't read the book, you're an exception because you read it, and I mean, you read it with great attention to detail, but you see the click, 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 and that all that is male, female, doesn't matter age. What would I do if I went back to my 10-year-old self? And my kids have told me that, I thought myself back to my 10-year-old self, and I was only how many years removed from that. But that's
Mhm.
the immediate takeaway is I put myself in that situation, and what happens, and
I loved how you said just because it wasn't a case of extremes doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right, right,
Yeah, because we're so quick to minimize our pain when it's
right,
not extreme.
right. And we compare our, I have a dear friend who lost her son to cancer at
Mm,
15. And she tells me all the time, you cannot not share your stuff just because you don't think it's as bad as my stuff. Like when my dad died, she goes, "We're going to talk about your dad dying, even though you don't want to do that with me because you're comparing it right away to my son's death." She said that doesn't take away from your experience being a real experience that has had a profound impact on you. But I think social media has done nothing but it accelerates that thought because we look on social media for the extreme. We hear the extreme stories. That's what's shared,
yeah.
and so we think if we don't have something extreme, it's not worth sharing. And I like what you said. This book is just it's kind of there's not right words for it anymore. Not normal, not suburban, but it's just like you said, for most people, for a lot of people, it's relatable. Um, and that makes it
It really
powerful in a
is.
backhanded way. Yeah.
When you were talking, it was really funny because I have two older kids and my now 29-year-old, she was sitting across from my friend in the hospital who had had a double mastectomy. And, I mean, it was a very hard time for her. But my daughter talking about trying to relate in a way where, your pain might not be as bad as somebody else's and you don't really want to share it. Well, my daughter wanted to relate so badly in a way that we didn't know that she did. And she was holding my friend's hand in the hospital and she said, I know, I had a cold once. And she was only like 3 or
Yeah.
something. And it was
Little.
just so adorable.
Yeah, so
And
adorable.
it was her way of trying to relate to her pain and meet her where she was. And I mean, we just need to be who we are in the moment and
Right.
not be afraid.
And there's such a humanness in that though, because that was born completely out of love and concern. And,
Exactly.
and it's not about, you know, that's one of the things I've learned from my friend who lost her son. It's not about the right words. You're not going to have the right words for something like that, or for a lot of different situations. We don't have words to meet circumstances. It's about the presence of your little girl holding that woman's hand. You know,
Hmm.
and the most powerful thing I can do for my friend who lost her son is just show up
Hmm.
and hold her hand.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And sometimes just be quiet with them, and that's all they need, you
Right.
know?
Right. And that's you know what? That's what we all need. That's what little Amy needs. And that's what, just to stay just showing up and holding somebody's hand. I think we all want that. We all need that. And sometimes, and this is gonna sound like I'm psychotic, but we hold our own hand. We
Well,
all
actually, talking about psychotic, we could have thought that about you. If you really did. Did you really do your Barbie's hair with a chemistry set?
yeah, well, I did all kinds of things, Anne, that I don't like to admit here on the podcast. But no, I did get the chemistry set up in there because I was trying to do something with it. And I didn't really blow it up, but that's a good. I love that whole scene where she's showing her the stuff in her bedroom, all of her collections, and she lays back on the bed. These are the finest dice known to mankind. I mean, that's good stuff.
Oh, it was. You know what? You showed every aspect of little Amy. The good, the bad, the ugly, the funny. And I also wanted to ask you because you said that your mom, she was the mom that God gave you for a reason. And did that realization shift for you during the book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because I was a mom when I wrote the book, and I watched, and I also saw, I always gave dad all the credit. Dad, 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 dad. But mom's the one
Mm,
who set me up for a lot of real things. And mom, in trying to keep me, and dad just let me be me. And mom also, helped me survive. And she absolutely was the
mm,
mom she was supposed to be because she realized the reality of life. Dad was more of like, everything's going to work out fine. This is going to be great. And mom was more like, she was like, you asked what I would, my reaction to my younger self as she sat across from me. Well, dad was the person on one shoulder going, "Go, Amy, go take all your clothes off and run naked across the house." And what he wouldn't have said that but per se, but he was supported the football outside, all the things I did that were kind of, he was like, she's fine, Sue, she's fine. And mom was the one on the other side, the other shoulder saying, hey, we got to fit in because we got to survive this whole thing. So I think as much as mom might not have liked me, she loved me. She loved me enough to try to help me to survive the rest of my life. And that was a gift, but I
Mm.
could have not ever seen that. I don't know, would I've seen it without the book? I don't know. I have no idea, but I definitely would not have felt it to the depth that I feel it because I knew she didn't like me, but somehow this book made me realize that she loves me.
I mean, though every child wants their mom to like them,
Oh,
right?
it's yeah, and I think
I
that that's
mean,
what those of us who've had that experience, we look for that in someone else. Like we want someone to be our champion, another female person in our life who will, you know, mother us or whatever it is we're looking for, and then we'll probably reject that
yeah,
too, you
yeah.
know.
One of the things that I think that really got you through, it felt like, I mean, you read two Bibles every night, and the Green Bible was very special to you. The spiritual thread in your story is so quiet yet profound. What role did faith play in your healing journey?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's my personal faith. I did see, though, when I wrote the book that, I thought that God had kind of showed up in my life in my 20s or when I went to college, but I did see in remembering the Bible, which I still have, and it's in my box from when I wrote the book. I did see that God showed up for me earlier than I thought God did. And I remembered reading that stuff, but I realized that had a huge impact on me before I ever acknowledged that it did. I was just doing what I thought they wanted me to do in church because I was kind of in one way I wasn't a rule follower, but another way I was completely a rule follower. And I think that was God just showing up for me at a very, very early age and me not seeing that. And I did go look at that picture of Jesus holding the girl's hand and the hand on the boy's shoulder. And I felt very physically and emotionally drawn to that as a child. And I think that there's an absolute reason for that because God was there and I didn't even know it.
Hmm. Yeah, you wrote Little Amy didn't know a thing about the challenges of religion, the simplicity of grace combined with the absolute complicated nature of it, the double standards that mixed unconditional love with strict requirements, harsh judgment with hypocrisy, and total inclusion with exclusivity, feeling unloved not by God, but by God's people, which, by the way, I understand 100%. Amen, amen, amen. Not being capable myself of loving all God's people, judging, being judged. In Amy's heart and soul, there was no room for any of this. As idiotic, lost, and naive as she seemed, and she was, her grasp of what was real was tremendous. If faith were real, she had it, unsoiled, unspent belief formed in the face of real life, not some sort of milky white childhood fantasy land. I mean, I loved it. I wrote it down when you were an adult telling your younger self that you believe in him too. I mean, come on. That was a moment for me.
Oh, I mean, and just having you read that back, I mean, that was obviously a reflection on my adult experience as someone who believes in God,
Yeah.
obviously, but to see that, I mean, to see that faith in my young self, I mean, that had to have a profound impact on me and probably changed my relationship with God again because I was like, wait, you showed up at the beginning, and wait, doesn't have anything to do with all these other people. This has to do with me and God, so there's another aspect of the book that changed me, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote, if I couldn't love her, meaning little Amy, who would? I mean, the gift that you gave yourself, the
Right.
most important gift that you gave yourself was love.
Right. And accepting. Yeah, I love that scene in the mall when I'm in the sporting goods place and I feel like that guy, the salesman is judging little Amy, and I get all upset about it. And I say that if I'm not going to stand up for us, who's going to stand up for us? If I'm not going to stand up for myself, who's going to stand up for me? And I think by that I meant like if I'm not going to just accept myself for the girl who wanted the helmets and the sports bag
Yeah,
and the bumper pool table and the sausage log, then who else is going to do it? And does that even really matter if I can accept
right.
myself for this?
Yeah.
Screwed up, well-intentioned, and messy, yet, okay individual with a bunch of quirks.
I want to take us to probably one of my favorite parts of the book. It was so deep for me, by the way. And so I want to read this. The truth was that I was an awkward child, an awkward, graceless, uncoordinated, angry girl who was difficult to love, mostly by herself, mostly by her adult self. Was she unlovable because of the freak she was? Or instead, was she a freak because she wasn't loved? Did she throw herself down the stairs in the middle of the night just to see if anyone would come and check on her? Because there really was something wrong with her, something dysfunctional, or as a reaction to what was going on under the surface in the house that actually happened. I was there. Did they ever discuss it? Because they never talked about it with me. Were they worried? Or did they, like certain people who hallucinated, drank a lot, almost got raped, just act like it never happened? How deep did this all go? And what parts was I not remembering? Wiping my eyes on the leg of a polyester pantsuit hanging over my head, I realized that the really screwed up part of the whole business was that everyone was going to forget about all this. Yeah, there would be pictures of the actual events and the sharp flashes of memory because they were real, but still, everyone would forget because that was the thing to do. It wasn't on purpose, it was human. And who wanted to go through life with all those memories in their head anyway? Maybe the luckiest people were those who couldn't remember. Eventually, thankfully, I lay in the fetal position on the floor and passed out, slobber moistening the gold shag surface. Sometime before dawn, I awoke, opened the door to the closet, and crawled over to the bed. It was quiet and I felt sick. I began to question myself almost completely subconsciously. Why did I let myself drink so much? Idiot. Why did I cry like that and fall asleep in the closet? Idiot. Why did I go outside at the party? Total idiot. It was my fault, all my fault. But at least I didn't drunk post on Facebook or text a bunch of people. At least there was that. As I drifted off, I thought about how lucky people were 30 years ago not to have the internet. I just want to say, what the heck? I mean, there was so much in this. Put me in this moment.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot there, and I think that the buildup of writing everything I wrote up till that point comes out right there. And, and the observations and, spending that time in my own imagination in that circumstance. And I think I'm being really almost too honest there, to the point where it's almost painful to hear, because that's my real inner monologue, especially, I mean, the whole, and I had never, I mean, this is the crazy part, Anne. I had never told anybody, and no one had ever said anything to me about the throwing myself down the stairs, which was true. That's a true thing that happened. And I think I realized in writing all the stuff I wrote up to this point and being a mom that no one ever addressed that. I remembered it, and I don't think I was even trying to be dramatic. I mean, that is a freaking
Oh,
dramatic passage, and but that happened, and no one, and then no one ever said anything. No one ever said a word about it. Dad would come up the stairs, but I would already be in my bed, and I'm sure I was heavy breathing, and he just acted like it wouldn't happen, and then he went back down the stairs, and they never said anything, and I think that, I mean, I wrote the part where I drank and then gone upstairs and laid in the fetal position in the in the closet, because I realized that if I had was actually to live through this whole thing, I would be at a point of completely emotional overwhelm, like too much, like I can't handle anymore. Because that's right after my mom and dad and I are drunk in the room downstairs and say goodnight to each other. My mom holds me in her arms and tells me how much she loves me, how loved I am. And I think it's just too much. It was too much to write it. It's probably too much to hear it again. I'm not saying you shouldn't have read it. I'm saying that's just a lot, and so I think that's a reaction, all that
yeah.
honesty and all that analyzation, and then that inner monologue is, I think, the classic overserved inner monologue. Blame it all on yourself, but we don't have the internet,
Right.
which is a great line.
I love because I would have been even more messed up if I would have had Facebook back then,
Oh,
I think.
100%. And little Amy was well served not to have it. Um, as was Sue, probably would have been, my mother probably would have been more, like some of her
Right.
own personal stuff would have been harder
Mm,
with her mom and her looking on Facebook, and Kim would have been okay, but Kim would have been even more. I mean, she would have been okay, but it would have been hard on her,
right.
and Rick wouldn't even know anything was going on. But that you're right though. I mean, and it was lucky she didn't have it. It's a good observation, you know.
You wanted to save your younger self from your future pain when you drank too much in college and slashed your wrist. You didn't want to die, but you did want someone to acknowledge the pain. And it feels like, and you can tell me if writing the book helped you acknowledge your own pain.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it validated a lot of things. Not in writing the book, and I clearly did not actually go back in time, but it's about taking it seriously, like letting my mom off the hook because she did the best she could, but also that stuff actually happened and it had an emotional legacy that was real.
Hmm.
That was real, and it's back to what we said. Like I could compare my childhood to a bunch of other childhoods, and my childhood was mild, completely mild, compared to other things that happen to people. But that doesn't mean that it didn't have a real impact.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that it didn't matter. It doesn't mean there was something for me to be healed from and freed from, regardless of what anyone else thought about it. And
Hmm.
that's the power in this story, because I remember writing that scene because the editor, I had kind of alluded to the because that actually happened in college. That another real memory that I obviously that was the hardest thing to share in the book. And I remember calling my college roommate and saying, I just wrote this scene about what happened when we were in college, because she was my roommate at the time. I was like, I don't even know what to do. She's like, this might be the most, she said, without it, you're going to leave everybody hanging. Without it, it becomes less powerful. The story becomes less powerful. And I just remember telling her, I don't think I can do it. And she's like, well, you just got to decide. You're either going to do it or not do it. And I did it. And I, put it in the back of my head.
You were sexually assaulted in the book, why that was in the book in back in time.
Right. And a lot of people have asked that, and more people have told me that that scene doesn't fit in the book than anything else. But to me, it was a vehicle to show how extreme the I'm not going to tell anybody what happened was for a bunch of people in 1978, and certainly myself, you know, and
Right.
I was not sexually abused as a child. I had that exact scene happen to me at another point in my life, like in my late teens, outside of the house. And I wanted to use that as I went in the bathroom and brushed myself off and act like nothing ever happened. And I told myself in the half bath, I'll never tell anybody this. And I 100% knew I wasn't going to tell anybody that. And I'll stand by that. And it was the extreme that it showed the extreme that certain people in certain situations are not going to tell you what happened. And we don't know what we think we know is not reality. It's back to your quote about what's under that surface is what's really going on here.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and we didn't talk about those things back then. And it was kind of a, well, it didn't happen to anybody else, so I'm not going to talk about it because it wasn't well known back then that
Right.
those kind of things happen. We didn't have SVU on the TV and those kind of things where, it's a lot of people are talking about it.
Right. Or a 24-hour news cycle where they look for, everything's highlighted because you have to fill all the hours,
Right.
and we didn't know we were supposed to be afraid. But then the legacy of not telling something that significant to another human being, the legacy for the
Huge.
women we are today, that's part of the story,
It
and we're all holding on to things. You are,
nice.
I am. Just because I wrote a back in time book didn't mean I told everybody everything, and doesn't mean I don't sit here and think, oh my God, I can't believe I shared all that. And there's a part of me that doesn't understand how logically I thought that was a good idea to share those things. Like what in the hell were you thinking? You should have stuck with man bulges and chest hair. That would have been a better. But I do think it is why the book has resonated with people.
Yeah.
And I guess I just stand by that.
Another thing was when you left in 1978, when you left 1978 and left your younger family for your new family, it became really visual for me. I saw you leave your young dad to your elderly father. So, what was that like for you when you wrote it?
Oh, it was, yeah, because I had felt like I'd gone back in time. It just gave me a new appreciation. And you used dad as an example for dad. I mean, dad was once this young guy, who was
Mhm.
almost not the same person, but in a different shell and a younger version. And again, it's almost like looking back at my siblings and having this appreciation for him. It made me appreciate that dad, and dad's place in my life and mom's place. That they'd spent their whole life doing nothing else but just try to love me or contain me or whatever it is they were trying to do. But there was something like it's like backwards nostalgia, if that makes sense. Like seeing
Hmm.
dad as an old man was almost nostalgic after seeing him as a young man. It's like a,
Right, right, right. Yes, I totally understand that. And I felt that in the book.
right. Right. It was like the golden age is now, maybe. And we just didn't know it.
The final note from your son to your younger self was a gift. Do you think that love really can fix everything? Because apparently your son did.
Right. I wonder if he still thinks that. And that was an exact quote from the application he filled out for that summer camp. He put that in there. And
Yeah.
so it was, I think, while I was writing the book. So it became easy to use. I do believe that. I do believe when I mean, there's a lot of different contexts for that. There's self-love, there's love for our family members, our children, our spouse, all those things. And then there's love between people who are connected but disconnected in today's culture. But I do believe in our humanness, when two people connect in a way where there's nothing but goodwill on the line, a lot of those things that dictate who we can't care about, you know, begin to dissipate. And I do think that in the context of myself, me seeing my younger self as this, yes, off the chain, bowl cutted, bad glasses, freakazoid, but me seeing her as someone who was bold enough to live the way she felt like she could live and had all this energy and creativity, and me loving her for who she was is absolutely life changing. Me loving my mother and seeing her for who she was, absolutely life changing. So, in the context of all those different ways, I think love really can, in its purest form, unfiltered, can absolutely change anything, save anything.
And I also love that your main message to yourself that you wanted to convey was that no matter what is going to happen to you in the next decades of your life, you're going to be okay.
Right.
And I think that's a message for all of us to learn as we look at our childhood self and, go through our decades. I think consoling, validating ourselves, holding ourselves, and such an is an important message in this book. Do you think that little Amy would be proud of who you became?
Man, that I do. I think she would. There'd be a couple things she called me out on for sure. I think she'd be like, why were you? I don't know. She would. I think it depends on. I think before writing the book, I think she'd definitely have more stuff to say to me than after writing the book. And as I have gotten older
Hmm.
since I wrote the book, I think
Okay.
the combination of the book and age, I think the age normally, I mean, naturally frees us a little bit, makes us think, "Oh, I don't care anymore," But I think my kids leaving the house, that freed me even more. So I think there'd be a lot of things she'd be proud of. She'd probably still call me out on a few things if she was sitting here right next to
I think
me,
so. I
for
really
sure.
do.
But I think there'd be things that she'd be like, wow, like that was pretty cool. And I think she'd think the sports writing and the Excel spreadsheets, and I think she'd meet my kids and she'd be like, wow, I didn't even know we could do that. And I think that she would look at the book about her and she'd be like, wow. And I think she would, some of the accomplishments, it's not even the accomplishments, but some of the things I've gotten to do, she'd just be like, we're bad. It's true. And I play golf and I'm horrible at it, but she'd be like, get out there every time. And if you quit, I'm getting out of the cart and I'm taking you home. I mean, like she's the better version of me, though.
I loved your connection with her. I mean, I know you bought her more presents than you did the other two, and I know that you kind of showed favoritism towards her because, I mean, your mom kind of thought that it was because you needed it, she needed it, versus the other two, and I think that that was accurate.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love, and that's all, that's a reflection of how I felt in getting to know her through the narrative of the story. The reflection of, and I've never thought about this, of me getting her more gifts. And then there's a scene, I guess it's at the breakfast room table that morning we wake up where I'm like, if I really came to think about it, she's the most sane person at this table, really. Like the rest of these people are fruitcakes. And I think it's that you're
Sure.
seeing the progression of me reconnecting with her and being like, celebrating her rather than running from her. And that's what I love about the bonanza scene, because she goes off the chain when she says what she's thankful for, and she's thankful for pantaloons, and she like goes into this whole
She
it,
doesn't stop.
yeah, she doesn't stop. And I like how I called her the EF Hutton of the Thanksgiving bonanza table. But she, because everybody stops and listens when she talks because she's going to do something stupid. But I think all that is just a reflection on how I feel about myself in the journey of writing the
Okay.
book. Yeah.
Well, what would you say to Amy, little Amy, today?
Oh man, I don't know. I'd give her the biggest hug and I would just thank her. I think I would. I'd thank her because I'd be like, I didn't see it. I didn't see it before, but I see it now, and I thank her and I tell her I was how proud I was of her, and I tell her that, I'd spend the rest of my life, trying to honor who she was.
One of my favorite moments in the book is when the note appeared as an adult out of your green Bible. I wanted that so badly. I waited and waited and hoped that that would happen. So I was really glad that that was a big connection for me. It kind of came full circle.
Right. I'm glad you said that because you wonder what readers, you know, think or how you ended it. But that, and it comes very late. I mean, like on the last 5 pages, probably 4 pages before it comes. Yeah. And the satisfying thing is then you're left with the thought of, oh, it was real, and for me as the writer, it was real. I mean, the experience emotionally is very real for me. And so the note, I don't know, it almost validates it for me emotionally in a way.
Were your memories changed after writing this book?
Yeah, because the perspective of, and just the realization that, memories are malleable depending on who's doing the memory.
Sure.
So though I think little Amy's memories were absolutely little Amy's memories. But now I look at every memory through a different lens because now I have had this experience where I can turn memories from 1988 on their head. And I think it's probably something I need to remember as I remember, like put it at the forefront of that and not forget the experience of the book.
You mentioned this in the book, how you kept people at a distance. Do you still do that?
I think less, I think to a lesser degree. And I think that is because it's back to the power of sharing a story,
Mm,
and standing next to it and owning it. And that being, and it is a hard transformation for all of us who grew up during those time periods where feelings were not discussed, that it's okay. It's okay to talk about your feelings and you're not doing anything wrong.
hmm.
And I think that's something that's really important to those of us who were brought up that way. And it was not done nefariously. They were not telling us not to talk about our feelings because they were bad people. They were just living the way
It's
they were
just the
taught.
times. Right,
Yeah.
right.
But that it's okay not just to talk about our kids about their feelings, because I think that's the obvious outlet, but to talk about ourselves, to talk about our own feelings, and we're not being indulgent by doing that within the context, like you said, of when is it okay just to walk away from it? You know,
Right, right.
because there's all different kinds of little nuances to that.
Yeah. I also have to ask this because I really wanted to know if you went back to the intimacy of paper and pencil after that instead of the vulnerabilities of social media.
Well, that's an amazing question because this book didn't naturally lead to the next thing that happened to me, but there's statements like what you just said, and then I talk about thanking people and I need to get pens and thank you notes. That's a line later in the book, but I totally in an unplanned, uncharted way. After this book, I got reconnected with an old friend on Facebook, and this is the girl whose son died of cancer, and I hadn't spoken to her in 30 years. And she was at St. Jude in Memphis, and the cancer came back. And I sat down at my desk to write one Monday morning. It's like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. I think it was God, but everybody can put it in their own context. And I came up with this idea. I was going to start sending this pair handwritten notes while they battled this cancer. And so I started doing that. I hadn't written anybody a handwritten note in 30 years. And her son dies. I keep writing her because I don't know what else to do. She starts writing me back. We spend 2 years being pen pals without any kind of electronic communication. And the experience was so profound that I was like, wait a second, if this can happen from this one girl, what about these other hundreds of people on Facebook? So I ended up taking 18 months and I wrote 600 handwritten letters to all these people. And I wrote a book about that and I speak about that. So you just tied the two things together by that question, which is unusual, but I can see shades of what happened next in the story and what I learned from the story, and that's such a nugget of goodness for me to have been asked that question by you.
Yeah, I wondered if you really did write all those letters. So you really did?
Oh yeah, 100%. It took 18 months. And it was like I didn't, when I decided I was going to do it because of what happened with my friend Dana and her
Right.
son, um, I didn't really think I was going to finish. I just like this is a great kind of idea. I'll just roll with it and see what happens. But I say that, but I felt completely invested in it enough to buy stationery. But I thought 580 letters was not achievable. But then once I'd written about 30 letters, I was like, wait a second. And I didn't intend to write a book about it. I didn't intend to do any of that. But I realized that this may be the most important thing I ever did in my life. And it was like a freight train of good that I almost couldn't hang on to because it was just too much. But then once I got over the halfway point, people were expecting their letters then. And I realized again that this was going to be probably the most epic journey I ever went on. And so somehow, some way, I wrote 580 handwritten letters.
Well, I think it's going to be my next read because, you said that if my life could be so changed by someone I consider just a Facebook friend, what would happen if I wrote all my Facebook friends a letter? And, I mean, like we might think something like that, but we don't actually do it. You did it.
Yeah, and I think that's a credit to little Amy though too, and maybe a credit to writing You Cannot Mess This Up because me seeing little Amy as someone who was clearly not afraid to do something crazy. Little Amy, if she would have had an Amazon account, she could have really blown the world up. She would have. That's like the Facebook project was like a processed meat log from Hickory Farms. I mean, it was. I'm just saying it's and I think little Amy would absolutely be proud of the letter writing project. Because it would been right up her alley. She could have done it in her office there at the closet.
There you
She,
go.
but and I'm so appreciative of this conversation because I tied those two stories together in my head, but not to this degree. So I appreciate that very much. And
Yeah, that I wondered if there was some kind of connection there. Is there another time in history, another particular day that you would like to go back to?
after writing this book, I the first thing I think is different points, in my own life that I would like to go back to. As someone who loves history, I'd absolutely love to go back to like 10 points, just to walk through it and see what it actually felt like and maybe spend 36 hours or a couple days. And for me, that would be, the post-war period between World War One, World War Two, maybe the 50s when we're talking about what's going on, our moms were being brought up. I think I'm older than you, but we're a lot of the legacy of what we lived in the 70s was being under, and I would want to spend 2 or 3 weeks then, like wandering around, or maybe in a family inserted like that, and just understanding some of the nuances of the life, that we lived. And I don't know where I'd go back to again in my own life. Definitely, I don't think I could handle my teenage years. You know, but I would like to see my kids both young again because now that I've just gone empty nest, I'm holding like I realized that was one of the best parts of my life, and I knew it at the time, but there's no way you can emotionally, internalize all those feelings of how this is exhausting, but it's the best thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, life goes so fast and we just and it's also so busy that you don't, by the time your head hits the pillow at night, you don't realize, and we don't hold on to those moments. I had a moment the other day with my 8-year-old where we were sitting at the zoo and we're looking at the lions and he's eating his Dippin' Dots. And I'm just like, I just want to freeze this moment.
Right. And you knew right then, and you knew. And that's the thing, we have moments, I think, where we know, like, this is the best. This is, I don't know that it's. I feel that way now when I see my kids. I'm like, I just gotta hold on to this. I gotta hold on that
Right.
I'm having moments. And it's not devastating or tragic. It's such a normal part of life,
It
but
is.
and it's like back to what you said about, under the surface, that's where real life is. We just can't see it because we're busy doing all the things that have to be done.
Right. And it's kind of sad that we kind of just skim over it as on the surface and we don't really realize how important these moments are. But when we break them down, I mean, they become these snapshots in time,
Right.
and the photographs that we hold on to. But it's better to be in the moment than to look at them in hindsight and remember and wish that we would have enjoyed them more.
Right. And that's what's important about conversations and about real talk, your podcast, because it definitely is, I've got a lot to think about, but hopefully people who are listening, this will help them wherever they are in their journey, to remembering and thinking about those things in their current situation, not just in the past.
Well, I can tell you, Amy, I really enjoyed this conversation. How can
Well,
people get a hold of you? Do you have a website?
I do. It's amydaughters.com, and that's everything about both books, about of course, there's a bunch of silly stuff on there, and how to connect with me. And I love to connect with people, email, social media. I have my mailing address on there because I'm a proponent of letter writing now, after all my many letters. But yeah, and I'd love to hear from anyone about anyone's thoughts about anyone. And I will say too, this is one of the best interviews I've ever had, especially about this book. I really appreciate how thorough it's been, and you've taught me things about my own story that I didn't know. So I just am so appreciative, very sincerely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to have to read your Facebook one. Maybe we'll have to do another one.
I would love that, and I'm here for it.
Well, everybody, I just want to thank you for listening. And I just want to thank you for being here today, Amy. You just didn't write a book. Amy, you opened a portal for all of us to walk through. A time traveling, heart repairing, laugh out loud, healing journey that proves maybe it did really happen. Please grab her book. You Can't Mess This Up, a true story that never happened. And trust me, you'll want your own handy dandy notebook by the end instead of posting everything on social media. Remember, there is purpose in the pain and there's hope in the journey. And also, love really is the answer. Even when the question is, should I go back in time to find it? We will see you next time.